Welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today is Monday, August 9th, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing the 2022 United States governor elections and discuss a lot of the new different factors that are now influencing these races and do an update on my prediction and talk about where I think, a lot of these swing states are going to end up going because, governor races, in my opinion, are a little bit more interesting in the sense that they are more diversified, and in a lot of these cases, we see that states that traditionally wouldn't vote for one party do so in the governor's race. So we're going to be taking a look at that today. But before we do, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, and to turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And I also want to remind you guys that channel memberships are now open. If you would like to become a Purple Political Talk channel member, you can do so by, going down to the description and pressing the link there, or you can press the join tab next to the subscribe button. And in that spirit, I did want to give a very big shout out and thanks to our Purple Political Talk channel members, David Maxwell and Adam Hurst. We really could not do this without you. So now that we've gotten all of this out of the way, let's get started with my prediction. So while I fill in my safe states, I'm going to start off with the states for sure 100% are going to be safe where they are now. And then I'm going to, since these are the governor's map, I want to make some disclaimers about some states and move from there because these governor's map are going to be, they're not as straightforward as a presidential or Senate map. So that is the reason you're going to see, some races that are going to be safe, moved a little further, but do not get worried. But I'm going to start filling in these states. I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the general nationwide things we're going to be seeing. So I think that a nationwide perspective, these governor races are going to be somewhat interconnected to what we are seeing, as a country, right, with some of these races. And I think that the House races, the Senate races, the general nationwide environment is going to come into play in some of these governor races. However, at a party level, we have to remember that, at a statewide level, and especially the governor, that's not even tied that much to the whole national perspective with saying, oh, we're going to give control to the party I don't like. The governor is a little bit different because, I think that in the governorships, a lot of states become bipartisan, that they elect both Democrats or Republicans, even though they usually end up electing, Democrats by over, 20% or Republicans by over 20%. And it's just because the actual statewide politics is different. The federal politics that might come into play with a Senate or House race. So I think that's something we're going to end up seeing, kind of the individualization of these races. However, a lot of the same, factors that we're seeing come into play, a lot of the issues for that matter, that's what I'm mostly trying to get to right now. We're going to see them come into play, of course, when it comes to these races. The economy, I think that the economy right now is in a very tough shape, and I think it's going to get worse come 2022. I think that we're seeing a lot of shortages and things like that. And things that, economically, I'm seeing a lot of signs that lead or show to some recessions moving forward. The culture war. The big issues we're going to see come into play, COVID-19 in 2022, at a nationwide perspective, they're going to come into play. With all of this being said, I think the way the country is right now, politically, and with the policies that are being implemented or not implemented for that matter, the Biden administration is a pretty tough spot. And I think that at a general level, that's going to be hurting Democrats down ballot. We're going to see this in this prediction. And I think the Democrats are not in the same position they were, I would say, even a month ago. I think a month ago, they were in a lot stronger of a position when it comes to a lot of these races. But, these races, are, very similar, and they shift very quickly. I think states like New York, where we thought Andrew Cuomo was surely going to get reelected, a month ago, a lot of the, bad scandals have started to come back up. And, there's a lot of these races that are shifting. And in some of these cases, like in New York, it's probably going to be more of a primary thing. We're going to see them get primaried or get removed from office. But in other cases, it's going to be a pretty much outright victory by the other party. And they're going to get into that later on in the video. But this is what I would regularly start off with these governor races. I have some, explanations to make as for some states. But our starting off map is 16 Republicans in the safe column and 10 Democrats in the safe column. So this is actually bound to change because I think there's two states that, of course, will go to the Republicans in the safe column. In Vermont, we have Phil Scott, and in Massachusetts, we have Charlie Baker. I mean, two of the most insanely popular governors in the nation. And if you don't follow politics that much, right now you may be asking yourself, wait a minute, how are Vermont and Massachusetts going red? It's because these are Republican governors who are more moderate. They're more liberal Republicans that are actually popular in these states. And I think this is kind of in the point where, you know, statewide politics kind of deattaches itself from, regular national politics, federal politics. Once you're able to say, well, if you even vote for me, even though I'm not your party, the one that you have interest in, and if you're able to, make that distinction that your governorship, your office doesn't have any direct correlation to what will happen at a nationwide perspective, is why we get, a lot of these winners. And I think when you see strong candidates like, Phil Scott and, Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, that is when you're going to see these races, improve a little bit. But, those are two states that I think the Republicans are going to carry. And then the other state I did want to say a caveat for was New York. I think ultimately this race is going to be safe Democratic. Once we get to it, I think that one of the big things I did want to talk about here briefly before we move on to the actual toss-up states, in my opinion, is Andrew Cuomo. I'm going to be making a video in depth into the Andrew Cuomo situation and the political impacts it will have. However, I think that a general perspective, Andrew Cuomo is likely to get removed from office at this point. That I think is almost no question. Now, whether it be by impeachment is something that could happen, but if not, he likely either A, wouldn't run, or B, lose in a primary. So I think generally in New York, we're probably going to end up looking at someone like Letitia James. I think she's actually a pretty strong candidate for this race. I think she's a lot of her political actions, against Trump, against Cuomo, that kind of like, big political hero figure that she's building for herself, especially amongst Democrats. I think she might be a good candidate to run New York, or maybe the lieutenant governor is just going to take over from Cuomo and probably win that election. So that is one of the races I wanted to caveat. So now that we've actually gotten all the safe states with the ones I did want to explain a little bit more in depth, we have 18 Republicans and 11 Democrats. And, we also have California, which the recall race, I think regardless in 2022, when it actually goes up for re-election, we're going to end up seeing California, turn back blue, even if during the recall election, we do see a Republican win the race. So let's move on to the likely states. These are states that I believe will go between 5 and 15% for either party. And let's start off with the Democrats. So there's a lot of these states that I think the Democrats actually have a very big amount of support in that, they're, I would say, turning a little bit, more Republican, or in certain situations, we're seeing how some Republican influence and at a nationwide perspective, the quote unquote red wave is going to be impactful in these races. So among these races, I would say, is places like, Oregon and Illinois and Virginia. And, Virginia and New Jersey are going to be two states that are going to be in for election in 2021. The Virginia race is going to be very interesting. I think that the Democrats are probably going to still end up winning. Glenn Youngkin is probably going to get very close. At this point, how everything stands right now, I would say it stands at about 5%, I would say 6%. It could get closer. In Oregon, I think the big thing that's going to end up, hurting Governor Kate Brown is, her dealing with the BLM riots and then some of the COVID-19 things. And I think in states like Oregon, in states like Illinois, in states like Colorado, I think that the Republican base is going to be excited. And I think even among a lot of moderates, the COVID-19 restrictions and in Colorado and Illinois, and, the dealing with of BLM in Oregon, that's going to be a very impactful thing. And I think that one of the things that we're going to end up seeing is that culture war, mentality, the cultural aspect of things is going to be a huge, issue in the 2022 midterms. Critical race theory, the, cancel culture, the BLM rights. A lot of these things are going to be very big issues on the right. And for the left, you're going to see inclusiveness, making sure that there's more representation of many minorities and all of that. So at a cultural level, we're going to see that being implemented into the 2022 races. And I think these are some of the states we might end up, seeing that being implemented. And Maryland is a state that, could end up actually going, likely or safe Democrat. However, I think that Larry Hogan has, become very popular. He's a Republican governor right now, and whoever he backs might actually gain a little bit support just down ballot and stuff. So I do think that Maryland is a state that could end up going by more, but right now would probably end up going by that margin. So let's move on to the Republican states that I would say fall in the likely column. So at this point, I would say places like Alaska, states that are, moderately, liberal like Alaska, places like Iowa, Ohio that are, in its reality, it's a swing state, but they're not 100% safe yet. They've been trending that way. And along with that, I would say a state like Florida is probably going to end up going likely to the GOP. There's some other states that we could talk about, like South Carolina, I think also will go likely to the GOP. And I think that all of these races have different factors for going red. In Alaska, it's more of the factor that, you have a pretty popular governor, but you do have the Democrats possibly running strong candidates like Mark Begich or Al Gross in these races that are going to make these races competitive. By no means I do think that, the Democrats are going to end up winning in Alaska. However, I do think that the Republicans are going to end up holding on. I think that the Democrats are certainly going to make some gains in some of these states. However, we also must remember that at a nationwide point of view, the situation is likely not going to be very good for the Democrats. However, with that being said, in certain of these races, I would say Alaska and South Carolina are two big examples of that. We're going to end up seeing, just because the Democrats have a good candidate. In South Carolina, it's Joe Cunningham. And Alaska, like I said, it could be someone like Mark Begich or Al Gross. Where that possibility, right? It really ends up, being a positive factor for the Democrats, even in a year that could be considered a red wave. As far as Iowa and Ohio go, I guess it's mostly the fact that, they're not 100% solidified. They still do have their Democratic areas that are going to come out. I think these states probably going to end up going by 10 to 15%, upper likely margins. And in Florida, I think that Ron DeSantis is just super popular. I mean, I would say that certainly not Rick Scott, but Charlie Crist is who is likely at this point to get the Democratic nomination against Nikki Fried, but I do think that Charlie Crist could make, certain inroads with certain groups of voters. However, even with a lot of the recent pandemic handling, I think things that are going to be, impactful in the race moving forward, I do think that, DeSantis is becoming, a kind of culture hero for the Republican Party. That's actually very popular in Florida. The whole culture war thing in Florida, it's, I think, trending a little bit more to the right, and I think that gives DeSantis edge in certain counties. And I think the way that Hispanic voters are flocking to the Republican Party and DeSantis' appeal amounts many parts of the state, I think he easily wins this by 5%. It could get closer, but I think at this point that's where it stands. So that covers all of our likely states for both parties. Let's move on to the lean states. So for the lean states for the Democratic Party, I do think they have some races. In New Hampshire, I think that kind of goes by a lean margin. This could actually go by a likely margin. I think this goes by around 4 to 5%. It could by 6, 7, 8%. I think that really big thing that's going to help, the Republicans here is the Chris Sununu effect down ballot. Chris Sununu, if he was running in this race, which at this point, technically speaking, he would be running because he hasn't announced for Senate, but he's likely to announce for Senate. If he does run for Senate, this race is probably going to be lean blue. If he does not run for Senate, I think we're going to see this race being pretty much likely to stay for red. Remember, when we're talking margins-wise, probably lean or likely. But Chris Sununu, very popular. I think that's going to be, somewhat of a deciding factor. I would say same thing in Maine. I think the Republicans are able to run a more moderate candidate in a red wave year. The governor probably still going to hold on, probably by around 3 or 4 points. However, I do think, that the Democrats are going to end up, ultimately holding up in that state. Along with that, I do think that places like Minnesota that have, pretty established Democratic governor, I think they could win by 4 to 5%. Again, I think that one of the things that this race could have gone by more is just that the wave year is going to be an impactful thing. And I think one of the areas that is really going to end up feeling a lot of, the economic crisis that could be incoming. And I think it also boils down to the fact that a lot of the voters in these areas, and I think this also applies to a lot of, places nationwide, but more specifically in the Midwest, the way that trickle down economics has been, established and implemented in the United States, it's no longer only a political thing where politicians just look at the economy for everything, but it's now in the like-mindedness of voters that, a lot of voters are starting to become trickle-down voters in economics. That if the economy is good, incumbent party gets a vote. If the economy is bad, a vote against the incumbent party. And I think the economy is likely, to not maybe come down crashing, but, worsen a little bit. So I think that states like Minnesota could get, a little bit closer. Along with that, I think Nevada is one of the states that possibly is going to end up going lean blue. Steve Sisolak is the candidate in this race. And I think the Republicans in Nevada, they have some strong candidates. However, I don't think it's going to be enough to win this state. I think the Democrats have, built up enough of a base in this state. So now let's move on to the lean states for the Republican Party. I do think in places like Kansas and Texas, these are going to be lean margins. Laura Kelly, incumbent governor in Kansas, she's a Democrat. I think that's actually a very interesting race. It just ended up being that she ran against a very unpopular Republican in 2018. And, 2018 was relative Democratic tide. I do think that in Kansas, we're probably going to end up seeing a Republican win here. As far as who, I'm not 100% sure, but I think the Republicans are going to end up winning here by a margin around 3 to 5%. In Texas, I think is a state that actually the Democrats might end up contesting in some way if they were on the right candidate. Greg Abbott is somewhat popular. However, I think that there is going to be a cultural battle moving here. And I think another big thing is the growth of the Texas suburbs and how they've, pretty much flipped from Republican to Democrat. And I think it's going to make the state come into play. I would say probably going to end up going by around 4 to 5%. I don't think it's going to get close to Beto O'Rourke 2018 numbers as far as, the governor race goes. However, I do think it's going to get a little bit closer, and the Republicans have some reason to be worried in that race. So that covers pretty much all our lean states for both parties. Let's now talk about tilt states. Tilt states are states that I believe will go by less than 1.5% in these races. Pretty close races. And I think that they're going to be deciding factors when it comes to who has control in a lot of these states. And for the tilt states, I usually like going from west to east. So let's do it like that. So out of the state of Arizona, I do think that it's going to narrowly end up going to Kimberly Yee, probably by around 1%. Kimberly Yee is an Asian woman. She's the first Asian woman to hold statewide office in Arizona. And I think she's a pretty strong candidate. She's likely to run against. Remember, this is, subject to change because we don't know what's going to happen in some primaries. I mean, if you go back to 2018, there's many races, like example, Florida, where the two candidates were completely different. But this is assuming, the front runners right now are the candidates. In Arizona, we have Kimberly Yee, who's running on Secretary of State Katie Hobbs. I think that Kimberly Yee, she's not as unlikable as some other Republicans could be in the state of Arizona. I think she has somewhat of that Maricopa appeal. And another thing I do think with Katie Hobbs is that she kind of is like that Clinton-type Democrat. So, like Hillary Clinton-type Democrat. So, I think that's going to hurt her in the state. And I think Kimberly Yee is going to end up winning, this race in Arizona. Moving up to the Midwest, let's start off with, the Midwest is somewhere that I actually kind of want to retake one of the calls that I thought there was going to be a tilt margin, but I actually put Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan in the lean margin. I think she could win by 3 to 4%. Now that I'm thinking more in depth of it, I think Gretchen Whitmer is someone who probably will hold on to this, to this governor's mansion. I think that, her kidnapped attempt was, has a big thing to do with that. I think that she's garnered a lot of support. And even with the fact that, mask mandates, and that's going to be a very big thing, culture wars, I guess. All of this is cultural. Going to be a very big issue in 2022. I do think she still holds on in the state of Michigan. But going to neighboring Wisconsin, I do think that very narrowly, Tony Evers gets, loses his seat in Wisconsin. I think that, while Tony Evers might have certain, parts of popularity, he's certainly not an unpopular governor. I think that the Republican wave is probably going to end up taking him. I think as of right now, this race is very, very tight. There's a lot of possible Republican candidates here, and, with the right money, with the right campaigns, I think the Republicans are going to be able to win there. And with that, I do think that in Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, he's, retiring. And, I do see the possibility of, other Democrats coming into the stage and running. I do think that in certain ways, the Democratic Party is focusing too much on the Senate race, and that might cause them the governor's mansion. And I do think that the Republicans are running somewhat of a strong candidate. So I think at this point, nearly edges it out. And I think that the whole Republican wave, I think, is incoming in 2022, will really end up helping out the Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania. Last state, the state of Georgia. I do think at the end of the day, this is a state that's going to be close. I think that ultimately, Brian Kemp is somewhat popular. He's kind of garnered the respect in certain ways of, the suburban coalition in Atlanta, to a certain extent, of course. And he also has, some of the Trump supporters. However, we saw the coalition Stacey Abrams was able to build in Georgia for Raphael Warnock and for Jon Ossoff. And I think she might be able to replicate this when it comes to the governor, if she is the candidate or not, which I think she could be the one running for governor. I do think Stacey Abrams could actually do a very good job, in that race and actually end up, with the victory. And I think that, this is a state that could end up being close. But I think Georgia is a state that is going to be long-term turning into a blue state. And I think in some ways it's going to be like Virginia, that it goes further to the left. Now, of course, I think the Republicans still have a chance to win here. However, I do think that, Stacey Abrams is probably going to be helpful enough to whoever your Democratic nominee is, whether it's herself or someone else. But I do think at this point, Georgia could go very narrowly blue. So this is my final prediction: 27 Republicans to 23 Democrats. I do think that the Democrats are going to have to, do a lot of, defensive work in a lot of places, mostly the Midwest and parts of the Sun Belt. And I think it's just simply going to be a very tough election year for the Democrats. They're going to be facing a lot of challenges, and I think that, ultimately for them, it just comes down to being the incumbent party. And remember, the first midterm for an incumbent party is usually the worst midterm. And I mean, just with how much Joe Biden has not done, I guess, pretty much only big thing is going to be that infrastructure bill, which should be passed sometime soon. That's the only thing we're seeing as of right now. COVID-19 cases through the roof. Vaccination rate is stalled. A lot of these different things, and a lot of the economic help wearing out, and they're replacing it, but that's going to cause more economic damage. I'm going to make videos all about these things that they really are going to have impacts in 2022 at the governor races, because of how independent each of the states are. They may not have a big impact, but they will have impacts to a certain extent. So that is what I think. Final prediction: 27 Republicans to 23 Democrats. So tell me what you guys think about my prediction down in the comments. Did you guys enjoy the video? If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And yeah, again, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a huge thumbs up. I'll see you in the next time, and goodbye.